When Nancy fluttered back to consciousness, Jonathan and Kim were still asleep. Was it possible that her spirit winding up in Maria's body wasn't a coincidence after all? Lost in her thoughts, exhaustion soon reclaimed her, and she slipped back into sleep. Meanwhile, across town, Hannah had remained in custody for days. As a manslaughter suspect, she was kept in solitary confinement and no visitors were allowed. Each morning, a police officer asked if she wanted to contact anyone, but ever since her interaction with Brock, she couldn't bear to face another person. As daylight waned on another day, Hannah withdrew into the dim corner of her cell, her clothes sticking to her skin from her feverish sweat. Emotions swirled around Hannah, enveloping her in despair and self-loathing. Thoughts of harming herself were arising with greater frequency than they had in years. But even if she had chosen that path, she had become too weak to move. For the rest of the night, she remained huddled in the corner, trembling from head to toe. By the next morning, she had lost consciousness. Officers discovered her with a temperature of 103 and had no choice but to call her legal partner. At that moment, Brock was at the hospital with Ashley. Search crews had finally found her washed up on a small island off the southern tip of Manhattan, her body huddled between rocks on the rugged shore. Exhausted and near death, she was rushed to the nearest hospital, and Brock arrived soon after. He was with her in the ICU when a call from the police interrupted his vigil. "Mr. Porter, I'm afraid your wife's health is in danger. She has a high fever and is being transported to hospital." His heart hardened at the mention of Hannah. "Officer, whatever happens to her is not my concern. My sister is in critical condition, and I hold Hannah responsible." With that, he hung up. Jonathan was waking from a daze when he checked his phone and saw that he was emerging from the cryopod 3 days earlier than planned. Worry gripped his heart, but just as he was about to sit up, Dr. Chang appeared and offered a comforting hand. "Everything is fine, Jonathan. Take a few minutes to regain your strength." "Then why did you wake me up so early? I thought every hour I spent in here was crucial." "It was, but circumstances have changed. While you were asleep, one of my colleagues discovered completely by chance that Miss Reynolds' blood has unusually high levels of the compound needed to treat your illness. Of her own volition, she came here late last night and insisted on donating as much blood as it would take to cure you." Jonathan's eyes went wide. "But her heart, she couldn't possibly." "She's okay. Your wife was able to donate enough blood to save her. They're both resting comfortably." "And my illness?" Dr. Chang smiled warmly, placing a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Davis." Then he let out a playful chuckle. "Imagine having not one, but 2 women ready to risk everything for you." Before Jonathan could even process the gravity of the news, the clinic security guard burst into the room with a panicked look. "Dr. Chang, Mr. Davis, Kim's father, is here with the police. He's accusing us of extracting her blood without consent and attempted murder." Feeling a bit lightheaded, Jonathan stood up and braced himself against the wall. "Well then, let's go meet them." As they emerged outside, a police officer approached them. "We have reason to believe that you've unlawfully detained Mr. Reynolds' daughter. I'm well within my rights to kick the door down and find out myself. So if you have an explanation, it better be quick." Jonathan locked eyes with James, and the fury radiating from him was intense. He couldn't truly believe that Jonathan could do anything to harm Kim. He was just angry that she had betrayed him. With a placid grin, he turned to the officer. "Unlike Mr. Reynolds, Dr. Chang is committed to saving lives, not endangering them. You'll find that Kim made every decision independently, and that she's inside resting comfortably. For the sake of her health, I suggest we don't kick any doors down." James seized, clearly struggling to control his anger. "Liar! You manipulated her the way you always have. Took advantage of her love for you in service of your own selfish ends. I'll ensure you answer for your crimes, even if it costs me everything." Jonathan sighed. "Mr. Reynolds, please, can we rely on facts instead of feelings?" Just then, The door to the clinic creaked open and Kim stepped out, leaning on the wall for support. James stepped forward, but the police officer stopped him. "Kim, darling, there you are. What did they do to you?" Kim's expression hardened. "I made my choices freely, and I won't sit by while you debate my motives." James was struck dumb, a mixture of disbelief and relief washing over him. One of the officers turned to James. "Mr. Reynolds, is this your daughter?" James laughed nervously. "Sorry, officer. It appears my fatherly concern got the best of me." As the officer apologized to Jonathan and Dr. Chang, James closed the distance with Kim and checked her vitals, sighing in relief. When he was done, Kim swiveled to face him with a frosty glare. "Satisfied?" James nodded tersely. "Good. Then I'd love to get some sleep in my own bed." She turned to Jonathan with a cordial smile. "Goodbye, Mr. Davis." Jonathan swiftly fetched a wheelchair and helped Kim settle in it. As he pushed her toward James, he whispered in her ear, "Thank you, Kim. You saved my life." When Jonathan finally made it back inside, a nurse told him that Nancy had woken up, eaten a small amount, and gone back to sleep. He stepped over to her hospital bed and looked down at her serene face, his heart overcome with gratitude for the long life they could now enjoy together. Just as he leaned over to plant a tender kiss on her forehead, his phone suddenly rang. It was Hannah's father. "Jonathan, I'm sorry to bother you, but Hannah is in trouble." Jonathan's grip tightened on the phone. "What's the situation?" "We just found out that Hannah's been in jail for days. She's been transferred to the hospital with a terrible fever, and I'm afraid her demons have returned." "Stay calm. I'll send Jack to help you, and I'll be there as soon as possible." By the time Jonathan made it to Hannah's hospital room, her fever had finally broken. He found Jack in the middle of a tense conversation with his family's lawyer and quickly inserted himself. "Catch me up to speed. What the hell happened?" "From the looks of it, Hannah got caught up with someone's scheme to start a war between you and Brock. She was photographed kissing a man who looks like you, and when Brock's sister got involved, there was a tussle that ended up with her falling into the East River. Here's all the surveillance footage we could find." Jonathan's eyes narrowed in fury as he watched his imposter force himself on Hannah, then set her up for the confrontation with Ashley. When the video finished, he looked up at Jack with a murderous fire blazing in his eyes. And why was she left to rot in prison? According to the officers, Brock blamed her for everything, and she eventually confessed. "Where is he?" "NYU Hospital, across town. That's where Ashley got taken after they found her." "Get the car ready. We're going to pay Brock a little visit." As Jack beat a quick retreat, Jonathan heard Hannah's mother cry out across the room. "Hannah, my angel, you're awake." Jonathan rushed over to her bedside, feeding her a sip of water to soothe her parched throat. She looked gaunt and fragile after her confinement. The vitality in her eyes was completely absent. A surge of sympathy welled up within Jonathan that only fueled his anger. But he kept his voice soothing. "Everything is going to be okay, Hannah. How are you feeling?" She locked eyes with him, and her haunted expression hit him like a punch in the gut. Her father was right. Depression had wrapped itself around her like a snake, slowly squeezing the life out of her. Jonathan looked up at her parents. "Can we have a moment alone?" Jonathan shut the door behind them and turned back to see Hannah attempting to remove her IV. A wave of panic crashed over him, and he lunged toward her. But the rapid movement triggered a bout of dizziness. He staggered back and braced himself against the wall. "Jonathan!" Hannah's alarmed cry cut through the room. His weakened state had clearly gotten her attention. Regaining his balance, Jonathan grasped her hand. He saw a patchwork of bandage wounds on her arm and knew instantly that she had made them herself. A desperate attempt to feel something amid the crushing void of despair. As she yanked her arm back, tears welled in her eyes. "Don't. It's hideous." Jonathan's wrath had reached a boiling point. He could tolerate business feuds, but the pain that Brock had inflicted on Hannah was intolerable. Just let me go, Jonathan. It's all my fault. I've ruined everything. Hannah, you've done nothing wrong. You were set up. And the accident with Ashley? It was just that. An accident. Can you tell me what happened? Hannah looked away, and Jonathan could tell she was too entangled in her own web of guilt to see the truth. It was the worst state he'd ever seen her in. Suddenly, an idea sparked in his mind. He released her hand and feigned a fainting spell, barely catching himself on the bed. Once again, her concern for him won out and she sat up, helping him sit on the bed next to her. What's wrong? Are you sick? I've been in the hospital, but don't worry about me. We need to focus on your recovery and let the doctors do their work. Nonsense! Tell me what's wrong. Is there anything I can do? Spotting the alertness in her eyes, Jonathan knew his strategy had worked. He smiled warmly. I'll be fine. Don't worry. Now can you tell me everything you remember from the day of the accident? Her voice quivered as she started her tale, her knuckles white against the bedsheets. I was off to the supermarket when I saw someone who looked eerily like you. Jonathan took in every word, his phone silently capturing their conversation from his pocket. When it came to Ashley's accident, Hannah became distressed. I never pushed her. I always appreciated Ashley. We may not have been close, but I never wanted to hurt her. Jonathan rested his hand on her shoulder. Ashley's safe. You didn't hurt anyone. Hannah's eyes filled with shock and then relief. She's really okay? She'll make a complete recovery. So you have to stop blaming yourself. If anyone is the victim here, it's you. Hannah didn't respond, but she released the vice grip on the bedsheets. Satisfied with the progress, Jonathan got to his feet. I have to handle some things, but your family will stay with you the whole way. Call me if you need me. Jonathan hurried back downstairs and into his waiting car, then sped across town to NYU with Jack and Norman in tow. As they entered the ICU, they immediately ran into Brock in the waiting room. Tension ignited immediately, and Jonathan pummeled Brock in the face without hesitating. Brock reeled from Jonathan's unexpected punch, spitting blood as it dripped down from his battered nose. He roared in anger and lunged back at Jonathan, but Norman quickly blocked him. A violent confrontation broke out, which soon escalated, as Jonathan and Brock's men all joined the fray. The chaotic brawl was only halted by the intervention of the hospital staff. As the group separated, Jonathan stood tall, with a new slash marking his cheek, his icy stare fixed on Brock. Did you think I was bluffing at the wedding? I won't stand by while you abuse and abandon women just to prove your worth. Who do you think you are? Abusing women? Brock growled, wiping the blood off his face. You're the one who disrespected her marriage and made her attack my sister. Jonathan smirked. You've lived 31 years, and you still can't tell when you're being fooled? He straightened his disheveled suit. I've been in the hospital since the day after the wedding. That video you saw was a charade, and not even a particularly good one. If you fell for that, what else would you fall for? Before Brock could respond, Jack appeared and handed Jonathan a file. All the proof is there, sir. While Jonathan surveyed the contents of the file, Brock wrestled with the puzzle Jonathan had presented. Engulfed by his sister's near-death experience, he hadn't considered the possibility of a conspiracy. If it was true, then whoever was behind it had been disturbingly thorough. Had they known about Hannah's feelings for Jonathan? Or merely exploited the conflict between him and Brock? Either way, if Ashley had died, they would have set the stage for a lethal clash between him and Jonathan. The longer he thought about it, the more doubts began to gnaw at Brock. Why would Jonathan marry Nancy if he had feelings for Hannah? Why meet her near her own home? The man in the video physically resembled Jonathan, but he'd never shown his face. Furthermore, the figure in the video had plunged off the bridge in a desperate frenzy. When had Jonathan ever run from confrontation? And how did Ashley get involved in the first place? A paper bag landing in front of him broke his train of thought. As he instinctively grabbed it, a wealth of photos and data about a man in the video spilled out. The man was an out-of-work model living in Queens, and he bore a striking resemblance to Jonathan from behind. Among the documents was a record of $1 million deposit into the man's account the day before the incident. As Brock grappled with this revelation, Jonathan interjected. "There's also a recording you should hear." Jonathan pressed play, and the echoing silence of the hospital room magnified Hannah's trembling voice. It was a poignant tapestry of remorse and terror. Brock could almost visualize her unraveling the sequence of events. As the recording concluded, Brock's face blanched. Jonathan locked eyes with him. "Hannah witnessed her brother's death when she was young. She struggled with depression ever since. Even attempted suicide. We've spent years helping her recover, and this whole ordeal has triggered a relapse. I noticed fresh wounds on her in the hospital. Self-inflicted." Brock recoiled, and Jonathan's eyes narrowed, his voice brimming with controlled rage. "Hannah may not be my sister by blood, but she's my family in every way that matters. If you hurt her again, I'll come at you with everything I have." Brock's fists clenched as Jonathan's words landed like a body blow, a chill spreading down his spine, a sense of dread within him, the fear of losing Hannah forever. As Jonathan and his team moved to leave, Brock stepped forward. How is Hannah now?" "You've lost your right to ask," Jonathan retorted. "I've hired a lawyer. We'll sort this out in court once Hannah's recovered." Brock could only watch as Jonathan retreated down the corridor, a hollow emptiness forming inside him. Jonathan was a lot of things, but Brock had seen that when push comes to shove, he was an honorable man. That meant that Brock had done Hannah horribly wrong. She hadn't admitted guilt at the station, she'd merely accepted all the blame that he placed on her. And the fear and loneliness that followed brought her depression back with a vengeance. Leaning against the cold wall, he replayed their confrontation in the jail cell. Her hopeful eyes as she denied the allegations, expecting him to trust her. But he had been consumed by jealousy and anger. He hadn't listened. He had already judged her guilty in his heart. When she broke down and assumed the blame, her body shook and beads of sweat rolled down her forehead. The signs were all there, and he'd willfully misread them, leaving her to rot without a second thought. Not 2 days earlier, she had saved his life, and he'd sworn to himself that he would protect her. But now, his heart ached with regret. How had he allowed things to go so terribly wrong? The next time Nancy woke up, she found herself alone in the operating room, with Jonathan's pod hanging open. As she struggled to sit up, the nurse brought in a bowl of soup and reassured her. "Miss Reynolds left with her father, and Mr. Davis stepped out while you were asleep. He asked for you to call him when you woke up." Nancy nodded and reached for her phone when the door to the room swung open, revealing Jonathan in the doorway. Their eyes met, and a loaded silence filled the room. A quiet reunion after a dance with death. Sensing the charged atmosphere, the nurse discreetly left the room. Gazing at Jonathan, Nancy could hardly believe that they'd finally cured his illness. They'd been through yet another crucible and had once again emerged stronger on the other side. Jonathan moved quickly, wrapping Nancy in a comforting embrace. Her great nightmare, the specter of his death, was finally behind them. They could dream freely of raising a family, watching their children grow, and building their legacy hand in hand. Tears began flowing freely from Nancy's eyes, and when Jonathan felt them soaking through his shirt, he gently pulled back, wiping her tear-streaked cheek with his thumb. "It's all right, sweetheart. It's all behind us." She nodded, but her vision cleared as she noticed the bloody smear on the side of his face. "Jonathan, you're hurt?" Just a little scrap. Brock finally showed his true colors with Hannah, so I had to send a message. Nancy nodded solemnly. I'll go see her as soon as I'm able. Jonathan affectionately ruffled her hair. Right now, your only job is to rest. You steered the ship while I was sick, and now it's my turn. Leave Hannah and the companies to me. After all, we both need to be in good health if we want to start a family. The suggestion brought a blush to Nancy's cheeks, and Jonathan laughed. What? Too soon? She bit her lip. How many are we talking about here? How many do you want? Nancy shook her head and pinched his cheek. We can't be rash. The person behind all of this is still out there. Jonathan's eyes narrowed in determination. They won't be for long. Jonathan and Nancy left Dr. Cheng's facility later that day. And though returning home brought Nancy a wave of relief, the respite was fleeting. Important matters demanded her attention. As soon as she was settled, Nancy called Eduardo for an update on the tattoo search. Bad news, Maria. Whatever this symbol is, they've worked hard to keep it a secret. Not even the feds have a record of it. All I found was a company in Houston that used a similar logo 20 years ago. What kind of company? Construction materials. Nothing notable. They changed the logo a week after trademarking it and then shut it down soon after. Could be a false alarm, but I'll send you the details just in case. As Nancy began digging into the company's origins and tracking down its former employees, Jonathan came in to check on her. That's my Maria. Donates a liter of blood and back to work the next day. Nancy rolled her eyes, but was suddenly reminded of Dr. Cheng's comment about her nutrient-rich blood. She shared the news with Jonathan, and he furrowed his brows and thought. You think we should look into it? He said it was an incredibly rare blood attribute that might have been passed down genetically. So we should at least share it with Henry and my sisters, right? Jonathan nodded. You have always stood out among your family. Still, I can't picture Maria's mother being unfaithful to Chris. She loved him until the day she died, and it just doesn't add up. Sensing Nancy's distress, Jonathan reached out to comfort her. Let's not worry until we know. Once you have the samples from your siblings, we'll test them and go from there. That afternoon, Brock found himself pacing the room where Hannah was recuperating. He had come to apologize and reconcile, but he was struggling to find the nerve to confront her after all the damage he'd caused. Before he could work up the courage, he suddenly heard footsteps coming down the hallway toward him. It was Jonathan. Brock instinctively clenched his fists, but quickly relaxed them. He wasn't here to fight, and if he was being honest with himself, Jonathan had every reason to feel protective. Hannah was an innocent woman entangled in the web of deceit, and instead of being her protector, Brock had allowed himself to become someone else's pawn. He was ashamed of his naivety as much as his behavior. Jonathan stepped in front of him, his voice firm but calm. What are you doing here, Brock? I need to see her, to explain. Too late. She doesn't want to see you. Jonathan moved past Brock and entered the room. He tried to follow, but as soon as Hannah's parents caught sight of him, they came charging out into the hall. Hannah's father shut the door to guard it from the outside, while Hannah's mother charged up to Brock and delivered a devastating slap to his cheek. She stared up at him with fiery disdain and jabbed a finger into his chest, his imposing physique doing nothing to quell her rage. You swore to protect her. You promised me she would be cared for. Is that what you call abandoning your wife to rot in jail? Is that what you call being indifferent to whether she lived or died? I may not be as rich and powerful as you, Mr. Porter, but I only have one daughter, and I will die before I tolerate harm coming to her. What kind of husband are you? What kind of man are you? Brock stammered, struggling to think of a way to placate the irate woman in front of him. Please, I just want to see my wife. You still dare to call her that? Let me be perfectly clear. Our daughter is not your wife, and you will never get the chance to hurt her again. Hannah is filing for divorce. The specter of divorce loomed in the air, hitting Brock like a physical blow. The mere thought of being left by his bubbly, vivacious Hannah filled him with a profound dread. He plunged into matrimony due to familiar pressure and Hannah's pregnancy, but their connection had deepened since. The peaceful nights spent holding her were his refuge, and as far as he was concerned, divorce was out of the question. He yearned for nothing more than her presence, for the opportunity to apologize. But could she possibly want the same? Would his mere presence only drive her deeper into her melancholy? As Hannah's parents proceeded down the hallway, Jonathan stayed behind. "How are you feeling? How's the fever?" Her voice came back as a hollow whisper. "I'm fine. It's better." Jonathan sat on the bed near her feet. "I've talked with lawyers, and they say we have an open and shut case for divorce. All you have to do is sign the papers and I'll take care of the rest." Hannah nodded. "Thank you, Jonathan. We're family. This is what families do for each other. And from the look of things, we should be able to go home this afternoon." Hannah seemed to flinch at the sound of the word home. "Where will I go back to?" "To your real home. Your parents are waiting for you. We'll get you back on your feet and then find you a new place, okay?" She nodded with relief. "Okay." Just then, Jonathan's phone rang. Noticing it was Jack, he stepped out into the hall to take it. "Sir, it looks like a Chloe Morgan used her husband's account to pay the model that posed as you in the video." Jonathan's face lit up in surprise. "Chloe? Why?" "We're not sure, but we have eyes on her. Want us to pick her up?" "Do it, and put her somewhere discreet. I want to question her myself." Hiding behind a nearby planter, Brock watched Jonathan finish his phone call and rushed out of the hospital before slipping into Hannah's room unnoticed. Quietly shutting the door behind him, he found Hannah lying asleep, oblivious to his presence. He quietly approached her and studied her face, now so different from the woman he danced with at the wedding a few days earlier. The memory wrenched at his heart. They'd grown close so unexpectedly that he hadn't noticed how much he'd grown to need her until she was gone. He could still remember her playful smiles at dinner time, the lingering kisses before he left for work. Brock glanced at Hannah's arm and hesitantly lifted her sleeve, revealing her bruised skin marred with discoloration and scabs. Each mark represented an emotional wound that ran 10 times as deep. The sight filled him with pain, as if he was breathing in shards of glass. What right did he have to seek her forgiveness now? How could he ever rectify his mistakes? Overcome with guilt, his eyes brimmed with tears, and he planted a gentle kiss on her forehead before hurrying out of her ward. He got back to his car and intended to seek solace with Ashley, but a call from Austin disrupted his plans. "I'm taking the rest of the day off, Austin. I need to decompress." "It's about Hannah. Everything Jonathan told you checked out, and we just found out who was behind it. A woman named Chloe Morgan." Brock shook his head in confusion. "Who the hell is that? And why would she target Hannah?" "Jonathan was her real target. Looks like their families used to be close, and now there's some bad blood. We tried to find her, but Jonathan's men got to her first." Determination sparked behind Brock's eyes. Perhaps this was his chance at retribution. "Where are they keeping her?" "Underground facility in Brooklyn. Jonathan's turf. We'd never get in without going through his men." "Give me the address. I'll take care of this myself." Jonathan arrived at the facility in Brooklyn to find Chloe bound to a rusty chair. Rose stood over her with a smug grin and gestured to a bucket of water in the corner. "I had to knock her out to get her to shut up, but that should bring her back." Jonathan threw the water over her face, and she sputtered back to consciousness, her eyes lighting up with fear and confusion. "Jonathan, is that you? Thank God you're here to save me." Jonathan leaned against the railing, his expression cold and impassive. "Cut the crap, Chloe." "What do you mean? Why am I here?" "Rose, can you refresh her memory?" "My pleasure." Rose skipped over to Chloe and unsheathed the razor-sharp knife from her belt. She sported an innocent, girlish smile that only made her words more terrifying. What did you say, Chloe? Should we start with fingers or toes? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch a tiger by the toe. Chloe stammered, scuffing the chair along the cement floor as she tried to back away from Rose. I'm innocent. I didn't do anything, I swear. But Rose continued to bear down on her, chanting her rhyme. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. With that, Rose snatched Chloe's foot and pressed the dagger into her toe. When Chloe saw blood burst forth from the wound, her defenses finally crumbled. Okay, I'll confess. Just stop. Please. Oh, man. We were just getting to the good part. Rose huffed and stomped back to the corner. Jonathan stepped forward and his gaze burrowed into Chloe. What are you waiting for? Confess. I filmed Hannah, she gasped. I found out about her and you, but I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. I was just hurt and upset. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. Why? Hannah and Brock are innocent. Chloe let out a long sigh. When she looked back up, her innocent facade had suddenly dropped. She locked eyes with Jonathan and gave a scornful laugh. Why? Because of you. I was the Davis family's darling. Sophia left me. My marriage with Steve was all but guaranteed. But you couldn't stay out of it, could you? You destroyed everything. You forced me into a loveless marriage with a man I loathe. My life is ruined, and it's all your fault. So Hannah was just collateral damage? It was the only way I could get to you. Jonathan smirked. You got to me all right. Was it worth it? He signaled to Rose, and she started slowly creeping toward Chloe again. Suddenly, Chloe's desperation returned, her eyes flitting between Jonathan and Rose. Jonathan, Mr. Davis, please! My life is so miserable. I lost my senses. I made a mistake. Jonathan turned toward the door, flashing a look at Rose. Since Mrs. Morgan's life is so miserable, why don't we help relieve her of it? With that chilling comment, he stepped through the door and slammed it behind him. As he emerged from the facility, a security guard approached him. Sir, Brock is here. He's alone and he wants to see Chloe. Jonathan's eyebrow lifted. Let him in 30 minutes. As he made his way to his car, a devious smirk played across his lips. His trap was set. Now, he just needed Brock to take the bait. 30 minutes later, Brock was led inside by Jonathan's men, and the scene sent a shiver down his spine. Chloe was bloodied and bruised, but clearly still breathing. He'd left her this way as a message to him. As he took it all in, he found it hard not to be impressed by Jonathan's ruthlessness in protecting the people he loved. Such unwavering devotion was incredibly powerful. His gaze returned to Chloe, and an inferno of rage sparked in his gut. This woman had single-handedly destroyed his marriage, robbed him of the only woman he'd ever loved, and nearly caused his sister's death. Drawing a silenced pistol from his belt, he leveled it to the unconscious woman across from him. It turned out that he had a similar sense of loyalty to Jonathan, and if he didn't want to finish the job, then Brock would. The next morning, Jonathan headed for Davis Group headquarters for the first time in what felt like months. As he entered the lobby, the receptionists gasped and rose to greet him, hustling to call the executive elevator and usher him in. After dropping off his things in the office, he stepped across the hall to Steve's and knocked on the door. He quickly opened it, and a concerned expression spread across his face. You look pale, Uncle. Are you okay? Jonathan offered a slight smile. Seeing Steve in his element, he realized for the first time just how far he'd come. His insecurity and aloofness were gone, and they'd been replaced by calm self-assuredness. I'm fine, Steve. I'm surprised to see you here. Did you cure your blood problem? Jonathan nodded, and Steve sighed in relief. Does Grandma know? She's unaware it was even a concern to begin with. Now that I'm safe, I plan on keeping it that way." Steve promptly retrieved a folder from a safe and handed it over. "In that case, I'm returning your shares to you." "No need. They're yours now." Steve shook his head, glancing away. "Actually, I didn't sign the final confirmation. The shares you transferred still technically belong to you." Jonathan narrowed his eyes in surprise. Steve let out an embarrassed laugh. "To tell you the truth, I didn't sign because I thought, if I held back, maybe you'd be okay. We're only 3 years apart, but I've always relied on you. Knowing you were there to back me up, to fix my mistakes, that's what gave me the confidence to lead. But when you fell ill, I was afraid I couldn't handle the responsibilities you entrusted to me." Jonathan observed his nephew closely. It was true that they had been like brothers when they were young, but there eventually came a time when Jonathan was hard at work learning the business, and Steve was still preoccupied with video games and remote-control cars. They seemed to grow further and further apart after that. For years, Jonathan had relegated Steve to an afterthought, keeping him in the company, but never bothering to cultivate his potential. It wasn't until he heard the board of directors doubting Steve's capabilities that he got serious and sent him to Mexico. Seeing him now, Jonathan realized just how badly he'd let his nephew down over the years. Closing the distance between them, Jonathan wrapped Steve in a hug. "You stepped up when our family needed you the most, Steve. You did an incredible job, and I'm sorry I didn't do more to prepare you for it. Remember, you'll always have the strength to uphold the Davis legacy, whether I'm here or not." While Jonathan reintegrated himself into the Davis group, Nancy set about collecting hair samples from Maria's siblings, Henry and Venus. Ever since Dr. Chang's revelation about her unusual, nutrient-rich blood, she'd been preoccupied with curiosity about her lineage. She decided to keep it a secret until she had more concrete information, so she simply paid a visit to each of their bathrooms and plucked stray hairs from their combs and brushes. When Jonathan arrived home that night, he immediately tasked Jack with arranging for a DNA test. Whatever the truth was, it was about to come out. Meanwhile, Esther was enjoying a rare break from work and arranged to have dinner with her brother Dan, who was in town filming a movie. Their chemistry was as warm as ever, and they quickly set about teasing each other over recent developments in their lives. "So, Dan, what's this I hear about you dating 2 of your co-stars at the same time? The internet seems to think you're a dirtbag." He smirked. "And what do you think?" "Oh, I know you're a dirtbag." Dan let out a laugh. "So much for sibling loyalty. So if you must know, it was a huge misunderstanding, and we're still all friends. But the truth isn't as sexy, so what does the media run with?" "I know the feeling. Ever since I started the perfume company, I've been getting more and more unwanted attention. I've been getting these weird, threatening phone calls." "You think that's bad? I have restraining orders against 10 separate stalkers. One of them left a headless chicken on my porch." Esther cackled at her brother's misfortune, and her eyes suddenly lit up with an idea. "Well, if a contest is what you want, let's post a picture together and see who gets crazier comments. Whoever loses pays for dinner." Dan agreed, and Esther snapped a quick selfie of them before posting it on Instagram. But just as the comments began to roll in, her phone suddenly buzzed with a call. It was Xavier. Annoyed by his timing, Esther answered, tended not to have his number saved. "Hello? Who is this?" Xavier snapped. "It's me. It's Xavier. And since when do you drink with movie stars?" Esther rolled her eyes. "He's my brother, you lunatic. And what makes you think it's appropriate to call me every time I post something on Instagram?" Xavier stammered. I just... That's what I thought. Good night, Xavier." And before he could speak another word, Esther hung up. She looked at Dan and arched her eyebrows. "What did I tell you? 3 seconds and I'm already getting phone calls." All right, you win. When they finished dinner, Dan dropped Esther off at her hotel. No sooner had she stepped into her room than her phone buzzed yet again. Without even looking at the name, she picked up the call and shouted into the headset. Oh my God, you're worse than a stalker. What do you want, dude? To her surprise, all she heard on the other end was the sound of breathing. After a moment, an artificial voice greeted her. Esther. Her breath hitched, and her senses were on high alert. Who is this? If I told you, I'd have to kill you. Then again, I might have to anyway. Either tell me what you want or leave me alone. It's simple. End all communication with Xavier, or suffer the consequences. I'm not in the habit of taking demands from people who are too cowardly to use their real voice. A booming, eerily modulated laugh shot into Esther's ear and caused her to flinch. Listen up, you little brat. You can do this the easy way or the hard way, or you and your family will pay with your blood. A chill raced down her spine. Had someone overheard our conversation in the restaurant? Was this some sort of weird joke by Dan? Surely he'd never do something so cruel. Do you understand? Tell me who you are. Why are you doing... But the call ended before Esther could finish her question. Her heart pounded erratically as she stared at the private number displayed on her screen. She immediately dialed Nancy and played it off as a bothersome prank, but asked her to have Jonathan look into it. After what Nancy had said about her and Jonathan's enemies, Esther knew she had to be vigilant. Back in New York, Hannah had finally won her battle against fever and was discharged from the hospital. Her release coincided with a summons from the police to finalize her case, and with Jonathan unavailable, Jack and her parents stepped in to accompany her. The previous day, Jack had shared an edited recording of the conversation between Jonathan and Chloe. The fact that her marriage and her entire sense of self had merely been collateral damage in the stranger's plot somehow made it all hurt worse. On the car ride to the station, Jack shared Jonathan's plans for comprehensive psychological treatment, and Hannah begrudgingly agreed. He had helped her the last time, and she reserved a thin shred of hope that he could do it again. Hannah entered the police station with her head down, causing her to slam into someone on their way out. To Hannah's horror, she looked up to see that it was Brock and Ashley. As their eyes met, Brock froze before mustering a shaky greeting. Hannah. Hannah offered no acknowledgement, lowering her eyes and continuing inside. She instinctively held her breath, as if sharing the same air as him might prove too much for her. Her father intervened and pulled Brock aside to share a few terse words. Meanwhile, Ashley shot her a nervous wave. Hannah looked up at her, eyes devoid of emotion, and Ashley faltered under her hollow gaze. Brock soon rejoined them and reached out for Hannah, but when his hand brushed her arm, she recoiled as if she'd been touched with a branding iron. Stunned into silence, Brock could only stare as Hannah's father pulled a document from Jack's bag. This is the divorce paperwork. Sign it now and let's be done with it. With a nod to Hannah, he handed her a pen. Ready, Hannah? Her eyes flickered with a brief flash of determination, but by the time she signed her name, her face had morphed back into an impenetrable mask. Her father took it and passed it to Brock. Your turn. Unless, of course, you'd like to air out all of your dirty laundry in court. Brock's eyes narrowed in rage. You damn well know I'm not signing this before I read it. Then make it fast. I'm expecting our copy back by the end of the day tomorrow, and then to never see your face around my daughter again. He didn't wait for a reaction, grabbing Hannah and departing swiftly. After a moment of stunned silence, Brock looked up and called after Jack. Jack, talk some reason into that man. I just want to talk to her. Jack turned with a frosty expression. Mr. Porter, it's time you pay your dues. With that, he disappeared into a car and left Brock standing alone in the police station. Meanwhile, Jonathan was preparing for his first board meeting since returning to work. His recent absence had raised eyebrows, and even though the official line was a business trip to Mexico, his lack of involvement in key projects was so uncharacteristic that it had caused some unrest among the board's most powerful shareholders. Today was his opportunity to right the ship and assure them of Steve's resolute stewardship and his long-term commitment. As he looked over his notes, the door to his office opened and Nancy strode in. Jonathan looked up and chuckled. "You know I've fired people for barging in like that." "Go on then. Fire me. Maybe after the board meeting." He winked and stood up from his chair. But just as he was about to head out, Nancy grabbed his arm and held up a makeup bag. "Hold on. You could use a little touch-up." Jonathan frowned, but Nancy seemed to have anticipated his resistance and pushed him back into his desk chair before perching on his lap. "Your complexion is still a little pale from all the time in cryostasis. A tiny bit of makeup will make a world of difference, and no one will ever know." Jonathan narrowed his eyes, not sold on the idea. "Just consider it. It's no different than what people do on TV every night of the week. You want to represent us effectively? And if you appear worn out, they might doubt your leadership." "They wouldn't dare." Nancy held back a laugh as the idea struck her. "Still, you've just gotten married. You wouldn't want people questioning your vitality, would you?" His eyes turned predatory, and he drew her closer. "If you want stamina, I'll show you stamina." "I'm not doubting you, darling. I just don't want them to. Remember how those rumors haunted Steve?" Jonathan groaned. "I'm already late because of your little intervention. Isn't that worse than looking a little off color?" "Hardly. It's a power move. You don't wait for them. They wait for you." A smirk spread across Jonathan's mouth. "You're starting to scare me, Maria. Just get it over with." Nancy grinned triumphantly. "Just a quick touch-up, and you'll look better than ever." As she applied the makeup, Jonathan's voice dropped lower. "It occurs to me that I haven't seen you much in the past few days. I'm sorry if I've neglected you." "Not at all. I needed some rest, so I've been working from home. This was always going to be a difficult week." Finishing a light layer of foundation, she added a pop of color to his cheeks and lips, and then leaned back to admire her handiwork. "Perfect. You look dashing." "Thank you. Now why don't you wait here until I'm done, and we can circle back on that stamina conversation." Picking up his documents, he headed for the meeting room. As he greeted the board, they took turns warmly shaking hands, and one even noted that his Mexico trip had made him look even more vivacious than normal. He smiled to himself in a silent reminder to trust his wife's instincts. The meeting took off at a brisk pace, and after a glowing revenue report, Jonathan turned to acquisitions. "As you all know, the Davis Group has been expanding into residential real estate, and we've located a prime opportunity in downtown Los Angeles." One board member narrowed his eyes. "I know the one, and I agree it's promising, but Obsidian Industries has an iron grip on that entire market." "Indeed, and for reasons that you'll soon learn, I don't expect to win the bid. But in the meantime, we can make sure it's as expensive as possible for Obsidian, and force them to divert resources to fighting battles on their own turf." Steve nodded. "So you suggest we show interest, then pull back at the last minute to throw them off?" "Exactly. And we'll do it on every single one of their West Coast deals." "What are you angling for, Jonathan? A full takeover?" "Impossible. And their business elsewhere doesn't concern me. But they've disrespected us one too many times since they started operating on our turf. I intend to use this strategy to distract them, and when the time is right, cut their East Coast operations off at the knees." The room fell silent as his gaze swept over everyone. "Within 3 months, I intend to absorb every penny of their business in New York City." When Jonathan concluded the shareholders' meeting, he returned to his office to find Nancy asleep on the couch. Her significant blood loss had clearly left her weaker, and his heart ached at her fragile state. He carefully lifted her and carried her to his lounge for a more comfortable sleep, but her eyes fluttered open at the movement. "Is the meeting over?" Jonathan nodded. "Get some rest. We'll eat when you wake up. As he returned to his main office with Nancy asleep in the next room, he was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Jack let himself in and handed him a sealed envelope. "Those are the DNA test results." "Good. And Hannah?" "She signed the divorce papers, and we left them with Brock. I'm sure he'll fight some of us on it, but I think he'll come around." "Good. Our lawyers are ready to tighten the screws if needed. It's not about money. We just want Hannah out of this as fast and securely as possible." As Jack left, Jonathan turned his attention to the test results. 2 DNA analyses lay before him. One confirmed that Maria and Venus were half-siblings, but the other revealed no genetic link between Maria and Henry. That could only mean one thing. Chris wasn't Maria's father. Jonathan was puzzled at the information before him. All records suggested that Maria's mother had no other partners before marrying Chris. But somehow, her youngest daughter had come from another man. Something was clearly missing, but all he could do was wait for Nancy to wake up and hope for more of Maria's memories to surface. When Nancy finally woke up, it took her a long moment to gather her thoughts. Seeing it was still daylight, she moved from the lounge, and Jonathan glanced up from his desk with a smile. "Welcome back, sleepyhead. You want some lunch?" She nodded, and Jonathan went to fetch it while Nancy watched him with a faint smile. Who would have thought she'd be in the CEO's office at the Davis Group, and the CEO himself would be serving her? In her tired state, it all felt surreal. When he returned, he settled in next to her on the couch. "I've asked Jack to order us a feast. In the meantime, the results are in." Jack passed them over, and Nancy's eyes widened as she pored over the reports. "So Chris isn't Maria's biological father?" Jonathan nodded. "Do any memories suggest another man involved in Maria's life? An uncle or a close friend? Maybe even someone more secretive?" "No, nothing at all." Nancy's gaze hardened as she tried to dredge up more of Maria's memories of her childhood. Jonathan pondered. "An undisclosed secret, then? Maybe an affair?" "It's possible Maria's mother could have made a mistake and concealed it. It's also possible she wasn't aware somehow, or that it was some kind of violation." She paused, gathering her thoughts. But even on her deathbed, she never stopped loving Chris. And after everything he did to her, she remained hopeful, never bitter. The maze of the mystery seemed never-ending to Nancy, and she sighed in frustration. Jonathan comforted her, tousling her hair gently. "The only way to get to the bottom of this is to find out who Maria's father was and what role he played along the way. But we have pressing issues in Houston, too. We should get out there as soon as you're well enough to travel." Nancy nodded, and Jack soon arrived with their lunch order. They ate in silence, as both mulled the uncertainty that seemed to await them around every curve. When the weekend arrived, Jonathan went to see his mother and break the news about the Reynolds family and his bout with certain death. She had clearly been worried about his whirlwind marriage and sudden trip to Mexico, but the second his car arrived, she came running from the house. He laughed at the sight, not having seen her move so fast in years. When they finally dispensed with the greetings, Jonathan led her back inside and sat her down. "Mom, I'm here to apologize. I've been keeping some things from you out of concern for your health, but it's time you know the truth." Carol narrowed her eyes and listened closely as Jonathan told the entire sordid story of James's decade-long vendetta, his close brush with mortality, and Kim's heroism. When he finished, she sat quietly for a moment before tears welled in her eyes. "It's me that should be apologizing. If I hadn't called James' wife for help or invited him into our lives. Oh, my sons." Jonathan took her hand and gently tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "It's not your fault, Mom. You've carried the guilt of a wife's death for decades and done everything in your power to make amends. You can't plan for people like James. What matters is that we'll all be okay now." After composing herself, Carol stood up. "In that case, When will I have a grandchild, Jonathan? You're not getting younger. Jonathan laughed in surprise. Nancy and I need to recover and get our affairs in order before we can think about starting a family. Give us a half a year, at least. She winked. All right, half a year it is. But if there's no news by then, I'll be having a word with your lovely wife. Jonathan put his hands up in mock surrender. All right, Mom, call off the dogs. A few days later, Jonathan and Nancy were finally able to book their tickets to Houston. Not only did they need to investigate the eagle symbol they'd tracked down, but Nancy also intended to confront Stark. Bringing Esther along for her own safety, the trio arrived at the airport only to find Xavier already in the security line. He claimed he was there for a business trip, but his lingering glance at Esther revealed his ruse. Amused, Nancy stayed quiet and left Xavier to approach Esther. He gestured to her luggage. May I? As the four of them cleared customs and neared the departure hall, a child sprinted past Nancy, knocking into her and sending her spinning into Jonathan's arms. He brushed the hair out of her face and gazed down at her with a smirk. Are you okay, Maria? Just a bit stiff. I'll be fine. Seeing her limp slightly, Jonathan stopped her and placed his suitcase in front of her. Hop on. Nancy looked confused, so Jonathan patted the top of his suitcase. Sit. I'll push. Nancy scoffed. I'm not a baby. I can handle a little walk through the airport. But Jonathan ignored her protest, sitting her onto the suitcase and guiding it forward. Nancy huffed at first, but a begrudging smile spread across her face. The ride was unexpectedly delightful. Jonathan softened his gaze upon seeing her enjoyment, and the exchange wasn't lost on Esther, who groaned loudly. You two are nauseating. Please spare the rest of us. Jonathan shot back, a twinkle in his eye. You're welcome to join the fun. We don't mind. Esther rolled her eyes, but when she glanced back at Xavier, she found him extending his suitcase. How about it? Want a ride, Esther? Caught off guard, Esther spluttered. Actions speak louder than words. Without wasting a moment, Xavier swept her off her feet and set her on top of the suitcase before taking off at full speed. The game soon evolved into a race to their departure gate, with all four of them laughing and jostling. Unbeknownst to them, their antics had drawn the attention of bystanders, and their casual moment was about to become a media sensation. When they finally reached Houston, they checked into their hotel and went to their separate room. Nancy retired early as per her new routine, but Esther remained a night owl, scrolling through social media and stopping to comment on the video of them that had gone viral. Just as she was about to step into the shower, her phone buzzed. Seeing a private number on the screen sent a shiver down her spine. Jonathan had informed her earlier that day that his team had been unable to trace the previous call, but he encouraged her to pick it up if they call again, in the case they left any breadcrumbs about their identity or purpose. Esther's pulse quickened as she watched the phone ring. 7, 8 times. Finally, she answered. The same distorted voice crackled through the line. You didn't heed my warning. What is this anyway? Are you some kind of stalker trying to keep Xavier and me apart? A low chuckle rattled through the speaker before the voice's tone became grave. No more games. This is your last warning. Esther narrowed her eyes, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Here's my theory. You either have such an annoying voice that you're embarrassed for me to hear it, or you're afraid I'd recognize it. You're so adamant that I'm almost tempted to cozy up with Xavier even more. Maybe I'll marry him. An abrupt shattering sound echoed from the other end, like the caller had hurled a glass at the wall. When the voice resumed, it was icy and threatening. Have it your way, but if you cherish your parents' safety, you'll do as I say. Goosebumps rose from Esther's arms, but she did her best to keep her cool. As she opened her mouth to respond, A sharp click disconnected the call. Esther slumped onto the couch, reeling from the phone call, when there was a sudden knock at her door. Taking a deep breath, she moved toward it and gazed through the peephole. Of course, it was Xavier. Esther passed on a smile and eased the door open. "What brings you here?" "I think we both know the answer to that." Esther motioned him inside and moved to the sofa, an aloof smile dancing on her lips. "Do you consider me some kind of plaything?" Xavier's brow creased at her words. "Never, Esther." "So then you're the plaything?" His patience was clearly wearing thin. "Why do you insist on belittling what we have?" Rising, she closed the gap between them, her fingers trailing up his neck. She breathed into his ear. "Because that's what you desire, to be the plaything, to relinquish control." He stiffened, but held his response to her daring insinuation. Her smile broadened. "Yet you insist you don't." Annoyance sparked in his eyes. "Esther, enough." "Fine. If you're not interested, then leave." "Do you even comprehend what you're suggesting?" "Do you?" "I've been very clear. I'm only interested in your body." Esther watched his hands ball into fists as his temper boiled over. This was exactly what she expected, but there was a part of her that wished he had accepted her little proposition. After staring at her for a tense moment, he abruptly stormed out, leaving a resounding slam in his wake. Esther's mind reeled at his departure. As he turned to leave, she noticed genuine pain in his eyes. She suddenly understood. He sought more than physicality. He craved a genuine, emotional bond with her. A deep sigh escaped her mouth as she wrestled with the unease in her chest. She wanted nothing more than to explore his feelings for her, but she couldn't allow herself. Fixing her jaw, she grabbed her phone and texted Nancy. "No matter what happens, keep Xavier away tomorrow." When Esther arrived at breakfast the next morning, she was relieved to see that Xavier wasn't waiting. Grabbing a plate of food from the buffet, she took a seat across from Nancy. "How did you manage to get rid of him?" Nancy's brow furrowed in concern. "I had Jonathan assign him with an urgent task at our office out here. But why did you want him gone? Don't you trust him?" Esther sighed. "I got another call from the mystery number." Nancy was taken aback. "I thought that was a prank. Does it involve Xavier?" "I thought so too. But when Jonathan wasn't able to trace it, I started to worry. They must have seen that video that went viral because they said I hadn't obeyed their orders and my parents would be in danger if I didn't listen. Why would anyone care about your relationship with Xavier? I have no idea. I barely care about it." Esther's exasperation was palpable. "I don't even know where to start." "You're doing the right thing staying away from him for now, and we'll try to trace the second call. Do you think it could be some kind of stalker?" Esther shook her head. "I considered it, but what kind of stalker would have the resources to scramble their calls and keep track of us so closely?" Nancy nodded. "Good point. What about Dan? Maybe it's a prank gone too far?" "He's dumb, but he's not cruel. And I haven't seen Oliver in 5 years. He left for that geological expedition, and the only time I've heard from him since was a note he left for me at my parents'. They said it was 3 years old. I thought he never came back. I guess we were wrong." After breakfast, Jonathan, Nancy, and Esther journeyed toward the shuttered factory that had briefly used the eagle symbol they had been trying to trace. Once a vibrant part of the city, Houston's expansion had bypassed the neighborhood and left behind a derelict manufacturing sector. As they pulled off the highway, Nancy felt an unsettling emptiness. There was no sign of life, not even a stray dog. They had barely set foot inside the factory when Norman arrived, escorting a middle-aged man. His face was weathered and scarred, life's hardships visibly etched into his skin. Norman forced the man to kneel, having clearly roughed him up before they arrived. "Jonathan, meet Hank, fresh out of prison today. He's the one who purchased this company." Jonathan studied Hank, narrowing his eyes. "Why did you change the eagle logo?" Hank cleared his throat, visibly nervous. "It was an accident. It was the boss's personal symbol, but the admin department messed up the blueprints and ordered the wrong signage." Jonathan stepped forward, kneeling in front of Hank with an icy glare. "Who's your boss? What's his name?" But before Hank could answer, a gunshot rang out, and his body fell to the floor in a pool of blood. As chaos erupted, Jonathan pulled out a gun and shielded Nancy. "Don't worry, we're prepared this time." He turned to his team. "There's a sniper on the 3rd floor, 45-degree angle from the main entrance. Take him out." Just as his warning echoed out, another bullet found its mark, taking down the man guarding Esther. She scrambled back from the dead body in shock, only to be restrained by a familiar arm pulling her into a protective embrace. She looked up, and her mouth fell open in shock. It was Xavier. The dire circumstances left her no room to question his sudden appearance. He pulled her away from danger and into a hidden corner. Simultaneously, Jonathan yanked Nancy aside, shouting commands into his walkie-talkie. Before long, the noise of battle subsided and was replaced by an ominous silence. It was finally broken when Norman hustled up to Jonathan in Nancy's position. "We've captured one of their men alive, but the sniper escaped." "Bring him in," Jonathan ordered. As Jonathan's men escorted the prisoner into view, Nancy's pulse spiked. It was one of the men who had chased her into the tunnel. Strangely, he looked straight past her and flashed a chilling grin at Esther. His unsettling smile made Esther shudder, so Xavier enveloped her hand in his. She murmured thanks, then quickly averted her gaze. After Norman took the man away to question him in a safe location, the rest of them went back to the hotel to decompress. As Esther approached her room, Xavier seamlessly fell into step beside her. This time, her nerves were too frayed to even question his presence. Once inside, she headed straight for the sofa, but Xavier intercepted her, pulling her into his arms. His gaze was probing as he comforted her. "Is this why you sent me away last night?" Esther looked up at him and experienced something she had never felt with him before: trust. His presence in her moment of greatest need had spoken volumes, and she finally felt comfortable sharing her fears with him for the first time. "There was an anonymous call." Xavier nodded, encouraging her to continue. "There were 2, actually. They warned that they would hurt me and my family if I continued seeing you." She held his gaze firmly. "But I'm the target. You only got dragged into today's trouble because of me. This isn't your battle to fight." He cradled her and pulled her onto the sofa. "You'll be okay, Esther, and so will your family." She shook her head, looking up at him. "I've come so close to death, Xavier. I can't make my parents endure that fear again. And I'll never do anything to get them hurt." Her words faded away as she hid her face in her hands. The day's events had proven beyond a doubt that her family was a target alongside Jonathan's and Nancy's. She couldn't bear the guilt. Xavier gently tried to coax her hand away from her face, but she was unyielding. "My life is like a tornado. If I can barely manage to keep myself alive, how am I ever supposed to entertain a romance or build a life and a family?" Xavier paused, clearly touched by her show of emotions. He cupped her face tenderly and wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Then there won't be a romance. I won't push you, but I promise we'll ride out the tornado together." Before Esther could respond, Xavier kissed her, his warmth slowly seeping into her bones and dispelling her fear. The surfacing of her latent feelings brought her comfort. They were alive, they were together, and they were closer than ever. Perhaps the anonymous threat was not as all-powerful as it had made itself out to be. As the kiss deepened, she wrapped her arms around him and felt him stiffen in surprise. His eyes mirrored his astonishment before he reclaimed her lips with even greater passion. In the dim hotel room, with the heavy drapes drawn, time seemed to warp. After their long, fervent embrace, Xavier tried to guide Esther to the bath, but she clung to his arm. "Wait." She swallowed hard, then met his gaze again. "It's not just me. I have to think about my parents, too, and my brothers. I can't do this." The emotional tide had receded, leaving her face to face with their harsh reality. Xavier observed her, then smiled softly. "Then what if I become your secret boyfriend?" Esther was taken aback. "Seriously?" He nodded. "A covert romance. All of our communications will be untraceable and will stay totally hidden from the public eye." Esther could hardly believe what she was hearing. She knew all too well about Xavier's sense of pride. She had used it to provoke him countless times. His agreement to a secret relationship ran counter to everything she knew about him. "You would do that? For me?" "There's nothing I wouldn't do for you, Esther. You're the one." After a brief silence, she narrowed her eyes. "But why? I thought I was tormenting you. What is it about me that you even like?" Esther's mind whirled as he pondered her question. First, it was her unexpected intrusion into his life 3 years ago. Her vivaciousness contradicted his, igniting an attraction. Upon their reunion, he discovered her uniqueness, her talent, grit, and paradoxes. She was a mystery that both intrigued and confounded him. Despite his numerous vows to maintain a safe distance, he found himself irresistibly drawn to her, like a moth to a flame. It was a peculiar blend of love and exasperation. He longed for peace, yet couldn't evade the intoxicating tempest that was Esther. Finally, he'd come to believe that she was exactly what he needed all along. Unable to put his maelstrom of feelings into words, he shook his head, a weary smile gracing his face. "Honestly, I don't know." Esther laughed softly, her voice rich with delight. "Can you really be that oblivious to your own feelings?" He watched as she nestled into his chest, her smooth skin against his own, her gentle words sparking tender feelings within him, unlike any he'd ever known. His fingers played through her curls, his touch as light as his voice. "Yes, because you confound me, because I love you all the more for it." An impish grin curled at the edges of Esther's mouth. "Even if I've been with other men before you? It's in the past." "It really doesn't bother you? Where's the jealous Xavier who calls me when I've had dinner with my brother?" He leaned down, kissing her forehead. "That's also in the past." Esther scrutinized him. "So the first man I had sex with was named—" Xavier's body instinctively tensed, and Esther let out a huge laugh. "I knew it! No one lets go of jealousy that easily." Xavier groaned. "All right, you made your point. Baby steps." Caught up in their shared humor, Xavier felt contentment wash over him. Unable to voice this joy, he conveyed it through a fervent kiss. When he pulled away, he locked eyes with her. "Esther, let's get married when all of this is settled." Esther snapped her head towards him, startled. "What did you say?" He didn't repeat himself, calmly awaiting for her to process his suggestion. "Is this a proposal?" "I'm just forecasting. The real proposal will be a little more romantic." Her eyebrows lifted. "You're quite the strategist, aren't you?" "I prioritize what matters. Do you?" "Is it possible we're jumping the gun? The anonymous calls, the eagle tattoos, every horrible unexplained thing that's happened in my life. I can barely think of a week in the future, no less months or years. I'm sorry." Xavier took a deep breath. "I understand. We'll wait until you're ready." Esther grew silent, and Xavier regarded their intimate posture with a chuckle. "We're a couple now, aren't we?" Esther blushed. "Are we?" "I don't know what the future holds, but I can promise we'll tackle it together. What else do we need?" "You're making my head spin, Xavier. One minute it's secret boyfriend, the next it's marriage." "And I stand by that. We'll date in secret for as long as we have to, and then we'll wait to get married for as long as you need." Esther took in his earnest words and was stunned to find herself on the cusp of a relationship with a man who had practically tortured her since they had come back into each other's lives. But as disorienting as it was, she couldn't deny what she felt. She wanted to be with him. She laughed in disbelief and willed the words out. "Yes, Xavier, we're boyfriend and girlfriend." With that, he slid his hand into her hair and drew her into an explosive kiss. His movements were unhurried, ardent but gentle. A powerful, breath-stealing force followed by a tender brush of his lips against hers. It was the perfect blend of gentleness and firmness, and the most memorable kiss Esther had ever experienced. She laughed to herself as she thought of their first time. He really had come a long way. A world away from the cozy warmth of Esther and Xavier's hotel room, a nondescript factory basement in Houston hid a chilling sight. A man knelt, nails torn from his left hand, his body slick with a pain-induced sweat. His face twisted in agony, but still, he held his silence. Jonathan's subordinate grumbled in frustration. "We've tried everything, boss, but this guy won't break. We may have another way to make him sing." Jonathan's eyes locked onto the man's tattoo, and he reached forward, pulling the gag from the prisoner's mouth. He then forced the man's jaw open, dislocating it with ease. He handed a bottle of pills to his subordinate. "Glue his eyelids open, and then give him these sleeping pills, 6 a day, in 3 doses." The prisoner's face blanched. Enduring forced wakefulness might initially seem manageable, but with time, it would become unbearable. With his jaw hanging open, his words came out slurred and muddy. "Just kill me, you coward." Jonathan ignored him and turned to leave. "Keep a tight watch over the next few days. Keep him hydrated. Don't let him die. When he's ready to talk, let me know." Jonathan joined Nancy in the car outside, and they headed for their final stop before flying back to New York. It was time for Nancy to put Stark behind her once and for all. Stark was engrossed in his thoughts when the guard entered his small, solitary cell. A month into his sentence, he already showed signs of aging, with graying hair lining his temples. Though only in his 30s, he looked easily a decade older. Barely half a year ago, Stark was brimming with life. Now, with his bloodshot, lifeless eyes and hollow cheeks, he seemed scarcely a shadow of his former self. "Stark, you've got company." His heart pounded in anticipation. He didn't immediately look up out of fear that he was imagining it. Finally, the guard spoke again. "You alive? I said you've got a visitor." A visitor. The only one he'd approved was Maria. Could it be that she'd finally forgiven him? Hope flickered in his heart for the first time since his arrest, and he looked up. "You're not messing with me, are you?" The guard rolled his eyes as he helped Stark into a wheelchair and pushed him out of his cell. Stark could feel his face flush with anticipation and anxiety, a glimmer of moisture gathering in his eyes. When she had last looked at him, disappointment etched on her face. His last beacon of hope seemed to flicker out for good. His will to live had dwindled to nothing, but death remained out of reach. Approaching the visiting room in his wheelchair, Stark grew self-conscious of his disheveled appearance. Without a mirror, he used his hands as a guide. His hair was cropped close, and the soap they had provided him had left it stringy and unmanageable. Nonetheless, He did his best to pat it down and style it in the way he once had. His hands moved to his scraggly, unshaven face, then to his clothes. He made a futile attempt to straighten them, and as the door opened before him, his body trembled, his pulse echoing in his throat. Overwhelmed, he clutched the wheelchair's armrests. And then he saw her. They were separated only by a glass window, but she felt impossibly far away. Nonetheless, she appeared just as he remembered, youthful, radiant, and gentle. Bathed in light, she looked far removed from his world of darkness and despair. As Nancy picked up the phone on her side, Stark mirrored her actions, his eyes hopeful. The guards gave them space while maintaining vigilance. Nancy spoke first, and the sound of her voice made him shudder. "Hello, Stark." "Maria, I can't begin to tell you how much I've missed you. Did you get my letters? I write one every day." Nancy studied him for a moment, then dropped a bombshell. "Amelia is dead." Stark flinched, but retained his composure. "I see. Is that the only reason you've come?" "No. I thought it was time we had a chat." Stark beamed, and he subtly pinched himself beneath the counter to make sure he wasn't dreaming. "I'm so glad to hear that. How are you, Maria? Tell me everything. Life in here is dull." Nancy found Stark's indifference to Amelia's death startling. She had been a constant in his life for years. But then again, so had Nancy and her family. "I'm okay. And you?" A smile flickered on his face, only to contort into a bitter grimace. Tears brimmed in his eyes as he spoke. "My life is over, Maria. But as long as you're okay, as long as I get to look forward to our visits, then I have something to live for. You haven't given up on me, have you?" Nancy offered him a slight, comforting smile. "If I had, why would I be here?" He didn't seem to catch the hollow tone in her words, his face brightening and his cheeks flushing. His very spirit seemed to reignite. It was just as she'd hoped. Now she would get to extinguish it for good. She took a deep breath and pushed further, wanting to savor these final moments of comeuppance. "Aren't you curious why I haven't visited sooner?" "Work and school commitments, I assume. You always were a bright, shining star. I'm sure you're excelling in your career, and I'm sure before long you'll find someone else." He paused before pressing on. "Someone extraordinary. I wished it could be me, but alas." Tears ran freely down his face. It was only the second time Nancy had seen Stark cry, and it was even more affecting than the first. He struggled to restrain his emotions, his entire body quivering. His knuckles turned white as he clung to the phone, and though he tried to mask his face with his free hand, tears still managed to slip through his fingers. Nancy watched in silence, imploring her heart to stay steady. Gradually, Stark mastered his sobs. His voice remained weak. "I'm going blind. I can't use my legs. My hair is grayed. I've lost all hope, Maria. I pray daily that it will all just come to an end, but even death seems to have abandoned me. The torment is unbearable." He locked eyes with Nancy, no longer seeming to care that she saw him unraveling. "I have so much regret. What I did to Nancy's family. I can't help wondering where we'd be if I had done things differently." Nancy met his gaze, her voice steady. "But if you hadn't done what you did, Nancy would have ended the engagement. Without her family's support, you would have been left with nothing. You and I never would have met." Stark looked momentarily stunned. "Never mind that. I know we still would have found each other, because even with nothing, I would have been happy as long as I had you." Nancy closed her eyes to keep from rolling them. Stark, even on the edge, could still charm with his words. Taking a deep breath, she decided she had entertained his fantasy long enough. "There are 2 things I came to share with you, Stark. Have you been promoted at work? Better question. How many times?" Without a word, Nancy held up her left hand where a diamond ring twinkled on her ring finger. "Did you buy that for yourself? It's lovely." Have you ever seen a woman buy a ring for herself and wear it on her left ring finger? Stark's face blanched and disbelief clouded his eyes. He didn't want to accept the truth. Maria, tell me you're joking. Nancy's lips curled into a soft smile as she spun her ring under the light. It's not a joke. I'm married. That's why I couldn't visit sooner. Stark hunched over, gasping for air, as if he'd been punched in the gut. Witnessing his shock, Nancy blinked. Do you want to know who I married? He's someone you know quite well. Stark shook his head vehemently. You're saying this just to hurt me, aren't you? I can't believe it. You can't be married. Didn't you and Steve Davis break up months ago? We did. But who said anything about marrying Steve? Visibly bursting with anxiety, Stark clumsily attempted to change the subject. Isn't your graduation ceremony approaching? Next time you visit, could you bring some pictures? Speaking of pictures, here are some you should see. Nancy pulled up her wedding album and angled her screen toward the glass barrier. Stark's eyes went wide, and he reeled as if he had been shocked by a cattle prod. But his gaze remained glued to the screen. Nancy slowly scrolled through the images from her wedding. Jonathan rapping on the door, the exchange of the rings, their shared kiss, Nancy tossing her bouquet. When she finished, Stark sat in stunned silence, his head shaking involuntarily. Tell me it's a lie! Tell me those photos are fake, and this is all some kind of cruel prank! Nancy just smiled. Ask any of the guards if you don't believe me. It's hardly a secret. We've become quite the internet darlings lately. They can't get enough of us. She switched to her social media profile, showcasing a message from Jonathan announcing their wedding. You married that monster? So every time you sought me out, all the trust we built, the plans we made, it was all a lie? You two were conspiring against me from the very start? Nancy's heart surged with joy at the sight of Stark's world crashing down around him, and she hadn't even gotten to the good part yet. Opting to toy with him a little longer, she winked and gave him an approving clap. There's the Stark I know. So perceptive. You should be proud. Indeed, my loyalty was always to Jonathan. And every bad thing that happened to you was indeed our doing. We drove a wedge between you and Amelia, poached the team that designed the Phoenix, manipulated contracts, and recruited Lexi. It was so meticulous. Month-long scheme to win you over, probe for your weak spots, and then use them to destroy you. And a wildly successful one if I do say so myself. Pain, deep and raw, flooded Stark's eyes, as if he was the one who had been betrayed. But why, Maria? I loved you. I protected you. I planned our whole future together. I'm not a perfect man, but what have I ever shown you besides a doting affection? Nancy let out a soft chuckle. Why? You want to know why? Nancy leaned forward, her voice dropping to an ominous whisper. All right, Stark. I'll tell you. Nancy gazed at Stark's frail, shuddering form as she gathered herself to make the final twist of the knife. Her voice remained low, and her eyes glittered with satisfaction. Tell me, big brother, do you remember that time when our parents were away? When we were home alone, and we took turns lighting matches, testing whether the wax from a candle would catch fire on its own? A shadow of terror crossed Stark's face. Undeterred by his distress, Nancy persisted. We nearly set the tablecloth on fire. You dove to snuff out the candle and burned your hands. When Mom saw your blisters, you claimed it was the hot water tap. Without questioning you, she dressed your hands and made you dinner. Her lips curved into a wistful, pain-laced smile. Mom always cared for you so lovingly. I never even saw her raise her voice. At least not until I saw the video of you beating her and throwing her off a balcony. Stark wobbled in his chair, his eyes locked on Nancy, fear seeping into his gaze. You were an excellent student, but you were mischievous. Like that time you ended up in a brawl at the cafe and it ruined your clothes. You were too afraid to face Mom and Dad, so you had me cover for you, claiming you were out for a baseball game." Panic swept over Stark's face, and he tried to lift himself out of his chair, but one of the guards came over and abruptly forced him back down. "How do you know all of this, Maria? Was it Amelia that told you? She was crazy. You can't believe anything she says." Nancy narrowed her eyes and wagged a finger at him. "Tisk, tisk, big brother. I thought you learned your lesson about lying." "I don't believe you. I don't believe any of this." Despite his bellowing, Nancy's voice softened even more. "There's another secret, Stark. One that not even Amelia could know. Do you remember when you locked me in the lower cabin while Amelia was at an event? You brought 3 women to the cabin next door and made me listen to you while you betrayed me over and over." Stark's breath stuttered, his entire body racked with shivers. He looked at Nancy with horror, his voice hoarse with fear. "You're not Maria. Who are you? What did you do to the real Maria?" Nancy smiled. "That's right, Stark. I'm not Maria. The person you've known from the beginning was never Maria." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You know the truth, don't you? You just don't want to admit it. But there's only one person who knows this much about you. There's only one person who would be motivated enough to engineer this downfall for you. Say my name, big brother. Look me in the eyes and say it." Her words seemed to hit him like a sledgehammer. Nancy? You thought you'd killed me, but you didn't anticipate my spirit finding a new home. The first time I returned to Houston after my rebirth, I ran into you on campus. The sight of you terrified me to my core, but you assumed I was just a skittish girl who was afraid of strangers. That's the moment I knew I could defeat you. As for Jonathan, that was a lucky accident. But he loves me unconditionally, and when he found out about what you did to me, he turned all his resources against you. Turns out, he loved me in my previous life too. Looking back, doesn't it seem like destiny, big brother?" Stark shook his head incessantly, his body quaking and his eyes flashing a sinister glare she had seen so many times before. Nancy snickered, her voice bordering on mockery. "It's funny. You once promised me a shared future, a life of love and support. And now here you are professing your love again, praying for a life together. Such delicious irony." She pressed her face close to the glass, a sarcastic smile dancing across her mouth. "Tell me, dear brother, how will you face our parents in the afterlife when your time arrives?" Stark suddenly retched, as if he was going to be sick. Beads of sweat rolled down his face, and he sank into the wheelchair. After a moment, a laugh erupted from his chest. "So it's you." Nancy's voice dropped to a chilling low. Her eyes clouded with loathing. "Here's something else for you to think about. You believed your actions were driven by revenge for your father. But did you know your so-called grudge was all a game?" Stark's eyes grew wide in disbelief. "Right before my father operated on yours, your father consumed a massive dose of stimulants. Now tell me, how could such a poor man with no history of drug use possibly wind up in that situation?" "That's right. The man you've been communicating with all these years is my family's true enemy. He exploited you, setting a trap when you were just a child. He had you sulking around my parents, consumed by hate, waiting for the perfect moment to extract your revenge." Nancy sighed. "That man murdered your father, and then you spent your entire pathetic life doing his bidding. You never had a single moment of agency. Every thought had, every feeling you experienced, they were all lies, Stark. Your whole life was a disgusting joke." As Nancy's revelations unraveled before him, Stark's pain became so intense that sound and light began to recede altogether. She had thrown him into a black pit of despair from which he knew he would never return. His vision blurred, and the last thing he heard were the echoes of Nancy's words. "You'll never see me again, Stark. I hope you live the rest of your life like this." With that, he slumped out of his chair and tumbled to the ground, his icy blue eyes locked in an abject state of horror. Stepping from the room, Nancy took a deep, cleansing breath. A profound clarity enveloped her, as if the world, and her place within it, had suddenly become sharply defined. Past resentments melted away, replaced by tranquility. Stark had met his fate, and she felt her chapter of hostility finally close. Outside, Jonathan rose to meet her, concern lining his eyes as he took her hand. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" With a nod, Nancy squeezed his hand, and they slid into their self-driving car. She recounted everything that had happened from the comforting circle of Jonathan's embrace. And when a wave of emotion threatened to overwhelm her, she reached up to pull him in to a kiss. As they separated, she noticed a subtle change in his demeanor. He shifted uncomfortably and adjusted his pants. Nancy gasped in feigned disbelief. "Seriously? This is a turn-on for you?" Jonathan put his hands up. "It's out of my control, darling. Besides, wouldn't it be concerning if you laid on my lap and I didn't react?" Nancy's laughter rang through the car, and before long, they arrived back at their hotel. At that same moment, Esther and Xavier were upstairs at the same hotel, engrossed in their respective jobs. Xavier sorted through a mountain of emails, while Esther sketched a new handbag design. Over the past few days, they had fallen into a unique rhythm, working late into the night and rising long after dawn. They were interrupted by a knock at the door, and Esther shuffled over, her face lighting up at the sight of Nancy, Jonathan, and Norman. "Norman! Is it just me, or have you grown even more rugged since the last time I saw you?" Overhearing her comment, Xavier sprang up from his chair, quickly closing the distance to sling an arm around Esther. His words squeezed out beneath clenched teeth. "He looks the same to me." Nancy stifled a giggle as they all made their way inside. But once the door was safely closed, Jonathan wasted no time getting down to business. "Esther, we've been trying to figure out how those men have been tracking you, but we've come up empty. I even had Norman investigate our team, but he's certain there were no leaks. We have one last thing we want to try." With a nod from Jonathan, Norman unboxed a device that looked like a metal detector wand and turned to Jonathan. "Boss, let's start with you." Nancy ran the scanner over him as Jonathan stood with his arms outstretched. Silence. The same result came with Xavier. Jonathan then took the scanner and ran it over Nancy, and again there was no response. Finally, he passed the device to Xavier, who prepared to scan Esther. She threw her arms wide open and sidled up, whispering with feigned disappointment. "What a shame. I was hoping Norman would do the honors." Esther's playful comment darkened Xavier's expression. But before she could revel in her victory, the scanner let out a series of shrill beeps. Jonathan's face hardened at the sound. Drawing closer, his eyes landed on the diamond stud earrings that Esther was wearing. She scrambled to take it off, and Xavier did another thorough scan to ensure she was now clear. Esther's mind raced at the revelation that her earring had been bugged this whole time. She had been wearing the earrings for a month straight without ever taking them off, even for sleep. The thought that someone had stealthily swapped her earring sent a chill down her spine. Jonathan scrutinized the tiny diamond in his hand and shook his head. "This must be a new kind of tracker. We need to get it back to New York for further examination." He handed it to Norman, who pulled a lead box from his bag and dropped the earring inside to prevent it from transmitting any more data. Nancy's eyes suddenly lit up with an idea. "I know just the person to help us with this." "You trust him?" "With my life." "Good. Norman will stay here to oversee the interrogation of our prisoner, but the rest of us should get back as soon as possible. We'll be safest in New York until we get to the bottom of this." The group flew back to the city the next day, and Nancy wasted no time seeking out Eduardo, her go-to person when she stumbled across an unusual piece of tech. Eduardo ushered her into his safe room and cracked open the lead box. Seeing the tracker, his eyes lit up with curiosity.
Whoa! This is impressive. Where the hell did you get it from?
We found it on a friend of mine. Can you tell me when it was planted? Or trace it back? Eduardo hummed with enthusiasm.
It's very advanced, custom-made. I'd expect anyone with this level of expertise to have their security protocols on lockdown. But you never know. I'll see what I can do.
Across town, Hannah had just finished getting ready for her first court appearance with Brock. Days of intensive therapy had softened the blow of the entire ordeal, but her exhausted appearance told a different tale. It took all her energy just to will herself into the car. She found her father, Jack, and Jonathan's lawyer waiting inside. The pity in their eyes would have made a different version of her want to scream, but instead, she felt nothing. Staring blankly out the window, she girded herself for the drama of the upcoming legal battle. Brock arrived at the courthouse shortly before Hannah, but as he prepared to leave the car, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Seeing it was from Brazil, he quickly picked up.
Brock, I'm afraid your mother has taken a turn for the worse. They just got her in an ambulance, but it looks bad.
Brock felt a chill run down his spine. It was the news he dreaded for years.
I'll be there right away.
Hanging up the phone, he directed his driver to change course and turned to Ashley with a concerned look.
What's going on, Brock? It's Mom. We have to get back to Brazil.
His words hung heavy as Ashley fell quiet, offering silent prayers as they made it to her bedside in time. Back in the courtroom, the proceedings were about to start when Jack suddenly realized that Brock hadn't arrived. When no one could get a hold of him, the judge called for a recess until they could track him down. Hannah's emotions swirled as she left the courthouse as abruptly as she arrived. She was grateful that she hadn't had to face him, but was anxious to finally be done with it. As she wondered whether his absence was some kind of tactic, she suddenly received a call. It was Brock. Clocking her expression, her father snatched the phone and sent the call to voicemail before handing it back.
You should block his number, honey. He's just trying to manipulate you.
On the highway to the airport, Brock hung up with a huff and quickly typed out a message to Hannah.
Hannah, my mother is seriously ill. I'm rushing to Brazil to see her, and she wants to speak with you. Please, just pick up my call later when I get to the hospital, and don't tell her about our loss. The disappointment might kill her. Thanks, my love.
Hannah ignored the notification until she was back home, and when she finally read Brock's message, memories of their trip to Brazil and his gentle blonde-haired mother washed over her. Thinking of his mother's excitement about their baby, a fresh wave of guilt and sorrow crashed over Hannah. That's when she heard a knock on her bedroom door.
Hannah, Lotham's here. He wants to take you out.
Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone and replied to Brock's message with a single word.
Okay.
A few hours later, Brock emerged from the airport and sighed with relief at Hannah's one-word reply. When he and Ashley finally reached the hospital, a somber doctor hurried up to them.
I'm so sorry. There's nothing more we can do. She requested to be taken off life support when you arrived, so you may want to say your final goodbyes.
The words sent Brock spiraling into despair, but before he could process the news, Ashley had already rushed into the ward. As they entered the room, Brock saw their mother lying peacefully in her bed, her array of medical monitors all dark and eerily quiet. Ashley quickly began sobbing and threw herself at Mia's side, gently rubbing her fingers through her mother's hair.
We're right here, Mom. Brock and I are both here, and we love you so much.
Brock felt an invisible force squeezing his chest. Each step towards Mia became a monumental effort. Eventually, he reached the other side of her bed and dropped to his knees.
Hi, Mom.
A faint smile crossed Mia's lips, and Brock saw her eyes flicker toward the door. Catching on, he pulled her attention back.
I'm so sorry. Hannah couldn't make it. Her morning sickness has been terrible, and she had an urgent doctor's appointment.
Mia nodded and opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out.
It's okay, Mom. I can call her so you can hear her voice.
Would that be okay?
Mia hummed in approval, and Brock dialed Hannah. On the fourth ring, she picked up. Her voice was calm but tinged with sorrow.
Hello, Brock. Hannah, I'm with Mom and she wants to speak to you. Here she is.
Brock held the phone to his mother's ear.
She's on the line.
Mia's eyes lit up, and she finally found her voice.
I heard about your morning sickness, Hannah. Don't worry, I know all about that. When the baby is born, just bring him to see me.
I will, Mia. You'll be the first person we visit.
Don't worry about me in the meantime. Just take care of yourself and my little grandbaby.
Brock could tell his mom was on the verge of a coughing fit, so he retrieved the phone and got to his feet.
Hannah, I might be here for a while. Please take care of yourself and we'll see each other as soon as I get back.
Without another word, Hannah hung up. Brock sighed and slipped the phone into his pocket, and when he turned back around, he saw Mia clasping Ashley's hand, gazing deeply into her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. He had never seen his mother so open, so vulnerable. It was as though she was reaching out to someone else through Ashley, someone she held dear. Anger surged within him at the conspicuous absence of his father, but before he could express his resentment, Mia spoke.
Ashley, Brock, there's something I never told you.
Brock's heart pounded as Mia turned back to Ashley, her voice barely audible.
Ashley, you should know that you're not Lewis's child. Your father is from New York City.
What? The revelation left Brock reeling, but his mom continued without stopping.
His name is Davis, Roy Davis, and he is the former head of the Davis family.
The name hit Brock like a lightning bolt. Roy Davis was none other than Jonathan's father. He had transformed the Davis Group from a lightweight into a massive dynasty. If what Mia said was true, that would make Ashley Jonathan's half-sister. Ashley seemed shell-shocked, her grip tightening on her mother's hand.
Mia, what are you saying? How can I be the daughter of a man I've never met?
Mia's smile grew bitter.
Brock's father and I had a joyless marriage. He was unfaithful, always surrounded by other women. After Brock was born, I distanced myself from him in search of peace. But when Lewis took Brock away at the age of 4, I began to think I'd be alone forever. Until I met Roy Davis.
Suddenly, her beaming smile returned.
I've never met two men with such wholly different spirits. He was suffering from amnesia when I found him in a dingy city hospital, and he seemed so sad that I brought him home with me to recuperate. We grew close during his recovery. He was a charming conversationalist, a constant source of happiness. Despite being in his 40s, he looked far younger. As time went on, we fell in love, and when he confessed his feelings, I passionately reciprocated. I was still married to Lewis, and I knew I shouldn't have gotten involved with another man. But love triumphed over reason, especially when I discovered that Lewis had fathered another child of his own. Roy Davis and I shared a year together, the happiest year of my life. Then, one day, his family managed to track him down. That's when I learned about his amnesia and the fact that he had a wife and children in New York. I desperately wanted him to stay, but
tears welled in Mia's eyes, her voice trembling.
He wasn't mine to keep, so I let him go. He vowed to return, but he never did. By the time I discovered I was pregnant, Lewis had moved back with Brock and wanted to reconcile. I managed to convince him that Ashley was his own, but always secretly hoped that her father would come back to meet her. Years later, I ran into him by chance in Midtown Manhattan. I threw my bag down and ran towards him, but it was clear he didn't recognize me. He picked up my bag and asked me why I was crying.
Mia paused as her gentle sobs got the best of her. Brock locked eyes with Ashley, and the air in the room grew heavy with sorrow. Despite her condition, when Mia talked about her one true love, she seemed to revert to the vibrant young woman Brock had seen in old photographs.
Getting her emotions under control, Mia continued. I don't hold anything against him. I don't want you children to either. I've always believed in the afterlife. Maybe I'll see him there. Ashley was quietly shedding tears while a whirlwind of emotion churned inside Brock. As a child, he remembered spotting a photo of Roy Davis in his mother's album. Every time she came across it, his mother would weep uncontrollably. Eventually, rumors formed that the Davis family had abused and rejected her, and his mother's refusal to speak about it over the years only seemed to confirm those rumors. When Brock relocated to New York to expand his business, his deeper motivation was to seek revenge on the Davis family. He'd been ruthless in his attacks, and the rift between him and Jonathan had only grown deeper thanks to the strife between him and Hannah. Hearing his mother's story now, he felt as if every anchor in his life had been suddenly unmoored. Seeing his mother in tears had always ignited a deep sadness in him. He had only spent 2 years with his father in San Francisco before moving back in with his mother. And for as long as he could remember, she had seemed lost in her sorrows. Now, the cause of her grief was suddenly clear. With this new information, the jigsaw puzzle finally started to fit together. Mia's marriage to Louis was a business transaction, fraught with complexities that made divorce out of the question for each of them. But what about Roy Davis, his unsuspecting wife, and their numerous children? Did Jonathan and his older sister even know they had another sibling? Having poured her heart out, Mia suddenly seemed to be getting more and more weary. Struggling to keep her eyes open, she took Brock and Ashley's hands in hers. I know this is a lot to take in, but I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens, you two must always take care of each other. Brock nodded. Of course, Mom. Ashley will always be my sister. Mia exhaled a sigh of relief. Good. Then I can go to him without any worries. Tears stained her cheeks, but her eyes were peaceful and kind right to the end. She smiled faintly, and her eyelids fluttered close for the last time. Before Brock and Ashley could even get to their feet, Louis burst in, trailed by family members and lawyers. The room was suddenly filled with chaos and cries, but Brock took solace knowing that the woman who had experienced such immense sorrow had already left for the peaceful afterlife she deserved. Brock spent the following week at his mother's home in Brazil, organizing an elaborate funeral for her. Standing by the grave, his eyes fixated on the lush green in the distance, and a wave of melancholy washed over him. The grand event rang hollow in his heart. Who genuinely remembered Mia? She'd been little more than a bargaining chip to her parents. Her husband treated her as nothing more than a business partner. To the guests, she appeared to be mere idle gossip. Only Brock and Ashley mourned sincerely, their eyes puffy from tears. When the funeral was finished and Mia's estate had been settled, Brock and Ashley headed back to New York together. But just as they were boarding their flight, Brock got a call from Austin. Boss, we have a problem with the property we recently bought in Los Angeles. Brock's brow creased. The piece of land had been a hot commodity, and to Brock's surprise, even Jonathan had been interested, but financial strain from rescuing Bright Star forced him to back out. Could it all have been some kind of maneuver? What's the issue, Austin? The state government just contacted us. Archaeologists found a significant deposit of Native American artifacts during the survey. It looks like some kind of burial site. Brock winced at the news. If they've found historical artifacts, it could take years to excavate, and even then, they might lose the property. The best they could hope for now was insurance write-off, and they could hardly afford that after Brock's takedown of Bright Star. Before Brock could even get off the phone with Austin, he received a grim text message from his father, with the government report linked. If you're not standing in my office within 24 hours, I swear to God I'll have your head. Back at the Davis Group headquarters, Jonathan listened to Jack's report, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. Perfect. We're halfway there. Let's launch our new brand one day before Obsidian's press conference. Jack hesitated. But sir, our product line has similar quality and prices to theirs. Exactly. We're watering down the market to decrease their leverage. And when their bad news breaks the next day, people will lose trust. And then we'll absorb their market share. Jonathan nodded. There's one more thing. We might have to make sure everyone knows that Brock put himself in this position because of what he did to Brightstar. That will deter any major corporate partners as well. I can't help feeling like this is more than Brightstar, boss. Jonathan's gaze hardened. New York City is mine. He meddled in my territory, attacked my business, and hurt my family. I won't allow that to go unpunished. Just then, Jonathan's phone rang with a call from Nancy. He showed it to Jack, and without a word, Jack stepped out of the room. What is it, Maria? My beloved wife can't bear to be without me. To his surprise, Nancy's tone was unusually serious. Eduardo wasn't able to track the device, but he did find out that it started transmitting about 2 weeks ago, right when Esther was in Houston. Do we have a precise date? It was the same day she met Dan for dinner, and before that, she was in meetings all day. So you suspect her brother? Nancy paused before answering. I guess we can't count it out, but it seems way too obvious if it was. He posted their dinner on Instagram, and even took her back to her hotel. He saw Esther take Xavier's call. Plus, he's Dan. I've known him since I was a kid. I agree. Seems unlikely. Have we traced the data's destination? Dead end there, too. Whoever's behind this planned it meticulously. The data hit every major relay station in North America. It's impossible to tell which are intermediaries. All right. Then I guess we'll start at the bar. I'll have Norman look into it. Tell Esther to sit tight. At that moment, Norman was in a dank basement in Houston, taking one more shot and interrogating their prisoner. He'd gone nearly a week without sleep, and it was clear he was on the brink of losing his sanity. His eyes were blurry and unfocused, and his muscles twitched involuntarily. Norman grabbed his chin and jerked his head up. Ready to talk? I know nothing. He seemed to be clinging to his last shred of lucidity. Norman would have been impressed by his endurance if he hadn't found it so tedious. Going outside for a breath of fresh air, Norman suddenly received a dozen messages, including one from Sydney. Surprised to hear from her, he opened it first. Norman! Esther told me you're in Houston for work, and it turns out I am too. I'm performing with the New York City Ballet at the Civic Center tonight. Would you like to come? Norman's forehead creased in contemplation. He had never been to the theater before and barely knew what ballet even was. But just as he put his phone away, it buzzed back to life. This time, Sydney was calling. Norman rolled his eyes and picked up. Hello, Sydney. Norman! I was worried you didn't get my message, so I thought I'd call. The pure, unassuming tone of Sydney's voice struck an unexpected chord in Norman, and his voice became a little stiff. I did, just now. Sydney hesitated as if she expected him to say more, then broke the silence. Well, I just arrived a few hours ago, and I have some free time before the show, so I thought maybe we could meet for dinner before the show. My treat. Thank you, Sydney, but I'm afraid I'm busy with work. Esther said you'd say that because you're afraid to try new things. Norman sighed. To be honest, art isn't my thing. But it's ballet, Norman. You don't have to know anything about it. You just sit and watch and see how it makes you feel. Besides, I've been training since I could walk. I'm the best of the best. Sydney paused, then continued with a pleading tone. Come on, Norman. Just think of it like you're rescuing me. The same as when we got trapped in the snow. Norman gripped his phone tightly and clenched his eyes shut. He could find no way out. Okay, Sydney. In an instant, Sydney's voice was brimming with joy again. Norman knew he had been played. A half an hour later, Norman met Sydney at the restaurant across the street from the Civic Center. He ordinarily dreaded social interactions, especially one-on-one. So he was relieved when Sydney steered the conversation as soon as they sat down. Before long,
he noticed two girls at a nearby table throwing sneaky glances, their whispers adding to the restaurant's soft bustle.
See that pretty girl over there? Why doesn't my boyfriend listen to me the way hers does? And look how buff he is. Most guys like that are alpha male douchebags. He seems so sweet. He's got that aura, though, like he could take down anyone with his bare hands.
Suddenly, Norman whipped his head around and snapped at them.
You should lower your voice when you're gossiping about people.
Taken aback, the girls mumbled apologies and their faces flushed with embarrassment. As Norman swiveled back to his table, Sydney eyed him curiously.
What was that about?
Nothing. They mentioned envying my girlfriend and I asked them to not gossip about us. Anyway, you were telling me about your last trip to Florida?
Norman remained focused on his meal, oblivious to the fact that across the table, Sydney's cheeks had turned a vivid shade of red. When they finally finished their meal, Sydney asked for the bill, only to receive an unexpected response.
Your boyfriend has already taken care of it,
the server announced, gesturing towards Norman. Sydney turned to him in surprise.
But I said it was my treat.
Norman cut her off gently.
It's nothing. Don't worry about it.
Leaving the restaurant, Sydney put her arm through Norman's, and he escorted her across the street to the artist entrance before finding his seat in the audience. As the house lights dimmed and the whispers softened, anticipation swept through the room. There she was, Sydney, under the bright stage lights, visible from his first row seat. The program said she would be featured in 2 of the 3 acts, a group ballet and a solo. A brilliant white spotlight splashed the stage, revealing a spectacle utterly unfamiliar to him. Initially, he felt awkward, but as the ballet unfolded, an unusual tranquility came over him. The ballet itself was a mystery, but seeing Sydney move her body with such astonishing delicacy and athletic precision, she suddenly seemed human and alien all at once. He quickly found himself transfixed by her performance, but just as her solo started, his phone vibrated with a call from Jack. Grimacing, he answered the call with a whisper.
What is it, Jack? I'm in the middle of something.
Jack hesitated.
Is that classical music? Where are you?
The theater. Well, ballet, I guess.
You think whoever we're after is involved in the theater? I wasn't informed.
Norman paused before deciding to be candid.
I'm attending Sydney's performance. She invited me.
Stunned silence followed from Jack before he let out a bemuseled chuckle.
Norman at the theater. Now that's not a sight you see every day.
Norman bristled.
Just tell me why you called.
Have you gotten a hold of the bar's surveillance footage yet?
I have. It looks like the tracker was planted near the end of the night, after they'd had a few drinks. Someone bumped into Esther and managed to slip the device into her earring. It was so lightweight that she didn't notice. Unfortunately, the person was disguised and avoided the cameras, so we can't ID them.
Then it wasn't Dan.
No, but we can't dismiss the possibility that he was involved.
All right, keep me posted.
And have fun on your date. With that, Jack laughed again and hung up. Norman sighed with relief and hustled back toward the auditorium doors. But just as he put his hand on the doorknob, his phone rang again. This time, it was the man he'd left to guard their prisoner.
What is it? Make it fast.
You better get back here. He's ready to confess, but I'm not sure how long he'll last.
Returning his phone to his pocket, Norman glanced at the door handle and felt a pang of guilt for skipping out on Sydney. Unfortunately, as it so often did, duty called.